This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue the western leg of our 100-city silenced majority tour, we turn now to a new investigation that tracks what happens to many of the wild horses round up in this region by the Bureau of Land Management. Dave Phillips reports for the investigative news outlet ProPublica that a little-known livestock hauler is buying almost all the horses the Bureau removes from the wild in a program meant to maintain a sustainable balance among the herds. Like all buyers in the program, Tom Davis signs a contract promising the animals will not be slaughtered and insists he finds them good homes. But Davis is a longtime advocate of horse slaughter, and he refuses to disclose where the horses end up. Animal welfare advocates fear the horses he buys are being sent to the killing floor. For more, we turn now to my interview with Dave Phillips. I spoke with him last Friday in Colorado Springs, and I began by asking him what happened to these wild horses.
Before I tell you that, let's just take a second to appreciate the fact that there are wild horses out there right now. Thousands of wild horses in the West that are still this part of the old Wild West that never got tamed. These are horses that are protected by the government, much like an endangered species. Now, what happened to them? Well, the government has taken some of them off the land and it tries to sell them. It says repeatedly, emphatically, that it is so careful of who it sells them to that it knows for a fact that none are ever slaughtered or even sold to people who might resell them to slaughter. What we found in our investigation, in fact, is that they never check up on any of these claims. And they are selling one man in Colorado, this guy, Tom Davis. They've sold him 1,700 horses over the past 3 years.
Who has sold them?
The Bureau of Land Management, which is part of the Interior Department. Essentially, the federal government has sold these horses that it takes off of the range to this one buyer. Where they go, the government doesn't know, and Tom Davis is not telling. But evidence suggests that he is sending them to Mexico to slaughter.
Sending the horses how to Mexico?
That's a tricky question to answer. He sends them down to Texas, which is a very good place to sell horses without leaving a paper trail. Perhaps then somebody else exports them. We were unable to get export documents from the USDA. They wouldn't share them with us. Within Mexico is this big industry run mostly by European companies that takes American horses, butchers them, and then ships them over to Europe to be sold as steaks.
Wild horse meat?
Overwhelmingly, this industry is domestic horses, old, unused horses that no one wants and sells into slaughter. But what we found is that there are horses, wild horses, that are illegally slipping into this system. People that are selling them in, and the government's policing practices are so inadequate that not only do they never catch these guys, but they don't even say it's a problem.
Where is horse meat a delicacy?
You would be surprised. You can go to Japan and have horse sushi.
Horse sushi?
Absolutely. And in fact, the horses are also turned into other products. They're turned into hair weaves. They're turned into mattress pads. But generally speaking, Northern Europe, Belgium, France is where the market for this meat is.
Who tipped you off to this story, Dave Phillips?
I was in the middle of the desert in Nevada. And a very smart wild horse advocate named Laura Lee said to me, you know, you should look at the horse sale program and see if anything's slipping out of there, because they won't tell us. We've asked about this. We've asked the Bureau of Land Management, and they won't give us a straight answer. And so we started digging up documents using the Freedom of Information Act. And what it showed was so stark immediately. Most of the people who buy horses from the government are buying one or two. They're adopted horses that they are going to use as companion animals. This guy was buying literally truckloads at a time.
Tom Davis.
Yeah, Tom Davis. Sometimes up to 240 horses at one purchase. And he accounted for 70% of their entire sale program.
How much is he purchasing them for?
They only cost him $10.
A live horse costs $10. How much does a horse weigh?
These horses might be anywhere between 700 and 1,400 pounds. What's interesting is the government spends thousands of dollars to gather these horses up, and then they ship them to Tom Davis for free. Oftentimes that trucking bill is $5,000.
Where is his farm?
This is where it gets really interesting. He lives down in a very rural and beautiful place in Colorado called the San Luis Valley. He's literally just down the road from the farm of Ken Salazar, who's the Secretary of the Interior, and has a long business relationship with him.
What do you mean, a long business relationship?
He's often hauled cattle for Salazar, who's a rancher. They know each other. They've known each other for decades.
Does Ken Salazar know about this? Did you attempt to interview the Secretary of the Interior?
I attempted multiple times, and never got a word out of him. However, I do know that Tom Davis, the buyer, wanted to start his own horse slaughter plant there right next to his ranch, and tried to enlist the help of Ken Salazar's brother, who's our State Department of Agriculture chief, to try and help him get it started.
Former congressman.
Absolutely. Now, John Salazar refused, saying it was, it was a too politically hot topic, but wished him luck, according to Davis.
So, $5,000 the U.S. government spends, taxpayer dollars.
That's just for the shipping. To
ship a horse to Tom Davis, who buys it for $10.
It would be a truckload of 30 horses. So he'd buy that truckload of horses for $300.
And they would pay $5,000 to get it to.
After probably paying
the horses to him.
$1,000 a horse, probably also to gather it, at least. So let's say that the government's total expense is $35,000. He pays $300.
What could be the justification for this?
Well, the BLM has been taking excess horses, what it deems excess horses, off of the range for years. And it tries to adopt them out, but has very few takers. And so what it ends up doing is contracting private ranches, mostly in Oklahoma and Kansas, to essentially put them up in a horse retirement home. This is really, really expensive. And listen to this.
A horse retirement home?
They've now removed so many horses and put them in these horse retirement homes that there are more wild horses in the retirement homes, 47,000 of them, than there are in the wild. The BLM, this is extremely expensive, and so the BLM wants to try and get rid of these horses. It just doesn't have a good way to do it. And so some people suggested to me in my research, it may be that the BLM is looking the other way and letting this buyer, Tom Davis, break the law, because in a way he's helping them out. He's putting relief on this overloaded system of horse storage.
Who could you speak about to learn more about who Tom Davis is?
Tom Davis is in many ways just a rural guy, a guy who grew up around horses his whole life. He makes his living hauling cattle for people around Colorado. He's not a special guy in any sense. He lives in a very modest house down in a pretty remote and impoverished part of the state. For some reason, and a reason that honestly I can't say, the BLM has just decided that it's okay to sell him hundreds and hundreds of horses and never check what he's doing with them. Now, there are people within the wild horse welfare world, people who love these horses, who have said, if someone's buying this many horses, BLM, there's only one thing he could be doing with them: sending them to slaughter. And the BLM has responded, no, 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 we've checked this guy out. We have a long relationship with him, and he is above reproach.
Who are the advocates for the horses?
The advocates for the horses are all sorts of people, mostly who live near these bands of horses out in remote places, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, who have become captivated by just watching these herds, seeing them roam free out there. Also people in cities, and they watch the BLM very closely, or try to. They advocate for these horses to be treated better than they are. But they have had a lot of trouble trying to figure out what the sale program is doing, because the BLM's been really secretive about it. They treat it like they're selling, chemical weapons, when in fact it's just, basically livestock.
Dave Phillips, we're broadcasting from Durango on Tuesday. Talk about the western slope of Colorado, where the wild horses roam.
Well, western Colorado has some beautiful horse herds all up and down sort of the western border. I think there's 4 recognized herds, and what's interesting about them is genetic tests have been done on a lot of these horses. And wild horses are a mix of anything that ever got away from anybody. You know, it could be a draft horse that pulled a wagon, it could be a cavalry horse, you name it. But these horses have a lot of old blood in them that suggests that these are still remnants that are left over from the Ute Indians, who once controlled all of Colorado, mixed with everything else, like everything in America's mixed up. But they're still there, and really, to a large extent, they still are how they were 300 years ago.
You're turning this into a book, your research. What captivated you about the wild horses and what's happening to them?
I started with the stark, surprising figure that there are more wild horses in captivity than in the wild. There's no other animal like that in the world. You know, here is an animal that is wild but not wildlife, right? It's feral. It is sort of an American symbol and yet not a native. In a way, it's a lot like we are, and it shares a lot of our history. You know, mixed up immigrants, out here trying to find our place within the landscape, and it has a deep history that is tied to us. There were once maybe 2 million wild horses in the West, herds that went for miles and were rivaled only by the buffalo. And to a large extent, they were annihilated, like the buffalo were. They were shipped east by the trainload and turned into baseball covers. They were ground up and turned into fertilizer and chicken feed until by the 1970s there was only a fraction left, and then we protected them. And since then they've started to come back. There's now 35,000 or so. And it was an interesting issue to me because now they have to find their place, this part of the New West, in the Old West. How do we do that? How do we as people work together to try and find a sustainable way to make room for both us, native wildlife, and this interesting part of our heritage?
That was reporter Dave Phillips. I spoke with him on Friday in Colorado Springs about his new investigation for ProPublica titled "All the Missing Horses: What Happened to the Wild Horses Tom Davis Bought from the Government." We'll link to it at our website at democracynow.org.